It's faith and recovery. Recovery, that is, from alcoholism and other addictions. That's the topic of today's Austin Faith Dialogue, and we welcome you to join us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, welcoming you to this edition of the show. The term recovery has been used for several decades now to describe those who are making a comeback from alcoholism or drug dependencies or other addictions. But it's only recently that there's been more of a direct connection made between recovery and faith. And that's what we're going to be turning our attention to today, because there is a conference coming up soon that we'll learn more about of making that connection. And we're delighted to have two people who are leaders in that conference to share this with you at this time. We welcome Bill Wigmore, who is with the Austin Recovery Center. And we welcome Trish Merrill, who is Executive Director of Faith Partners. And I'd like to just start out, Bill. We have your title, Austin Recovery Center. Tell us how that got going and what it's up to.
Well, it's known in the community as ARC, and it started off as the Austin Rehabilitation Center. Actually, we're in our 31st year of service to the community. Its history began as kind of an outgrowth of the Austin State Hospital. There were many people being discharged to the community, and they were relapsing.
Oh, I see.
And the psychiatrist there, Larry Wharton, really wanted to have some kind of a halfway house arrangement in Austin. And that was how ARC got its existence.
What year was that?
That was 1967.
Okay.
And then it has grown since then to actually become the largest provider of alcohol and drug treatment services in Central Texas.
Okay. Now, I associate your center with that building there on
Rio Grande.
Rio Grande and
MLK.
MLK, the Faulkner Center.
The Faulkner Center,
yeah,
right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is an old historic home, and
the Faulkner Center was, it was the good old Wooten Mansion. It was built in 1898. And then it was turned into a treatment center by Delois Faulkner in the early 1980s. She spent a great deal of money reconditioning that building and adding a treatment center in the back portion of it. Mm-hmm. And then ARC bought it about five years ago.
Okay, so, but that's just one of several facilities that you've
That's
got.
right. We have 5 locations throughout the city where we do different services. Right across at the Faulkner Center, or ARC is what we call it today. We do detox. We have an 18-bed detox unit there,
okay,
with round-the-clock nurses and a physician. Above that is our 24-bed women's program. And we work there with women who are trying to regain custody of their children or have children, so it's a specialized female service. Mm-hmm. Across the street we have a 58-bed men's program called Stratford House, and then out near Buda we have a 32-acre campus for 24 boys. These are kids who've been arrested for alcohol and drug problems. Mm-hmm. And on Slaughter Lane we have a 15-bed girls facility, and then the McCabe Center is right across from United Way on the east side of MLK. And that's a 70-bed facility for federal prisoners coming back to the Austin area.
And that's all part of the ARC?
All part of ARC.
I see. Wow, that's extensive.
4,000 people last year went through treatment at ARC.
Okay. Well, I think, Trish, you don't have a facility.
No, I don't. I now have an office, though, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah. Tell us about how you got into Faith Partners.
Well, just a few of us started this little nonprofit about 2 years ago, and the mission of it is to help clergy and congregational leaders learn how to address substance abuse, both from the prevention side and from the recovery side. And so we're about the business of doing education and training and helping folks from congregations connect to the community resources like Bill Wigmore's place, and see what we can do to be a conduit for people who need help, and and what we can do for people who get into recovery and need a place where they can have some support and grow in their faith.
Okay, so you do this in relationship to various congregations in the Austin area. How many are you connected with? No.
Well, the main reason I've been really connected with the Austin area in the past is that I did a 5.5-year project with Texas Conference of Churches, and I worked a lot with the Austin churches at that time for several years, since 1990. And we have, I don't know how many churches that have done some substance abuse ministry, but we have at least 30 very active substance abuse ministries in
30?
various denominations,
Wow.
Baptist and
Across
Presbyterian.
the whole metropolitan area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well now, the sorts of things that they're doing in these various congregations.
Well, it may be very little. It may be just doing some education once in a while, or opening up their facility for an AA group or an Al-Anon group. It may be very extensive. They may be very involved and do a lot of education and work with parents and youth. They may also have a 12-step scripture class where they educate people about the 12 steps, and they try to bridge between recovery and faith and make people more welcome in congregations.
Now you used the key word there.
I
didn't
did.
you? Your segue into this conference that's coming up.
I did.
It's called Bridges.
Building bridges.
Building Bridges.
Right. And we feel very strongly that, well, the time is just really right. We're in a community, I think, where the faith community has been very involved in the general community, and there's an openness to learning about alcoholism and drug dependency.
October the 9th.
And so we're going to have this conference, and we're going to talk about both those things, what it means to be in recovery, what it means to be a clergy person who has to work with family members, how you get people to help.
Yeah. First Baptist Church.
Yes.
You don't have to be a Baptist to come, though.
No. We're encouraging clergy and key lay people to come, congregational leaders to come, people who have an interest in this area, maybe people who are in recovery from alcoholism themselves,
Yeah.
people who might want to learn more about how to get a ministry going.
So you're going to be taking part in this.
Yes.
Why?
Because I think it's important that treatment centers, particularly ARC, begin to reach out to the community and to the faith community in particular. We have started doing some of that. We've invited, about 2 years ago, some churches to come into our facilities and bring church services. Those have been very, very well received
Really?
by the clients.
Right there at Faulkner Center.
It's been very, very well attended. And
Is it a denominational kind of service?
we kind of rotate. There'll be a Baptist group in there one time, and a Methodist group in the next time, and a non-denominational group in the third time. So it's a kind of an eclectic arrangement we have.
Okay, so you're trying to open up to the religious community in that way, and with this conference is coming up, what would you like to see come out of that? Just give us a scenario of the optimum result.
From ARC's perspective, what I would like to see happen is we are redefining our programming, and we are making it, I hope, more spiritual.
Okay.
And a part of that process is to lead patients through the 12 steps. And I hope to entice some of the ministers from our community to volunteer at our facility, to come by and do fourth and fifth steps with our clients, which is
Okay.
kind of a confession.
Now, repeat those fourth and fifth steps. What are they exactly?
Step 4 is we took a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Okay.
And then the 5th is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And we hope eventually to have a core group of ministers who would be volunteers, and a core group of recovering 12-step people who would be volunteers, and let the patient choose whichever individual he or she might be more comfortable with in doing that.
Now, those fourth and fifth steps, as you describe them, combined with the first one, which has to do with need for a higher power, even though it's not defined in any sectarian way, it's spiritual right off the bat. So I guess the question is, why do you have to build bridges if that 12-step program is spiritual right off the bat?
Well, I think
And-
the two if I could jump in, I think
right.
the two communities have been very, very separate. Perhaps not so much in the beginning, I think. And I've become a little bit of an historian of AA history.
Okay.
And from the research that I've been able to do, I think the AA that existed in the 1930s and the early 1940s
Right.
was somewhat different from the AA as it has evolved into today. And during that time, there has been more and more of a separation of the faith community from the recovering community. And I think it may be time for those two populations to start moving
So
closer together.
why did it split like that? Why did they diverge?
Well, I think in large part, I would go back to 1955 when AA was recognized as a disease by the American Medical Association.
You mean alcoholism?
Alcoholism, excuse me.
Right.
I don't think you can
I was
catch
gonna
AA. Alcoholism was recognized as a disease,
right,
and
all right.
and I think a lot of people in the faith community said, well, if it's a disease, then you really need to have professional counselors, and it's the domain of the physician. And so they backed off more and more, and that's not the way it was in the beginning.
Okay. Now, Trish, faith partners. How do you reconcile this definition of alcoholism as a disease with a spiritual approach that presumably has to do with sin?
Well, one of the challenges, quite frankly, to bridge these two communities has to do with language. And one of the things we really hope to happen that day is that we gather people together, and there's some freedom and sense of hospitality in terms of letting people talk about their own feelings and their understandings and dialogue. I think we desperately need the church into dialogue.
Why do we need it?
Well, because I think, one, a faith community can be a great resource to somebody who's struggling with any kind of need for healing and transformation in their life. I think the church can really benefit from what people have learned in recovery and have worked the 12 steps. I mean, I think the fact that people really do work the spiritual program and have a faith, have a pattern of belief, and work with themselves, admit their own wrongdoings, and work to make amends. I mean, we really need that.
So it's really a two-way street.
Yes.
I mean, the people who've been through recovery, and I mean, at least in my experience as a pastor was, they had a great resource to bring to the rest of the folks in the church.
They really do.
And that they know what spirituality is because they practice it, and it's something that you have to do all the time. And it has to do with all of these key elements in spiritual growth. Confession is part of it, and making amends, and all of that. So it seems to me you got a lot of common denominator there, and we're going to have to take a break here in just a minute. But when you come back in the second half, I'd like to make that connection a little bit even more explicit between recovery and faith. And I'd like to invite you folks, by the way, to not go away. We're coming back, and we're going to continue this conversation about this really vital issue. Stay with us. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue. For today, our subject is faith and recovery, the connection that's going to be made in a forthcoming conference, workshop at First Baptist Church, building bridges between those two aspects of people's lives today. We're delighted to have Bill Wigmore, who is the Executive Director of Austin Recovery Center, and Trish Merrill of Faith Partners. Now, before the break, we were just beginning to get into this, the kind of the intimacy or the innermost connection, that somehow recovery and faith are not meant to be in separate compartments.
Right.
And that when the AMA defined alcoholism as a disease, then it seemed to be relegated to something that had nothing to do with spirituality or with concepts of sin.
Mm-hmm.
You're not saying sinner come home,
Right.
who's somebody who's addicted. But where does sin enter into it? I mean, if you're going to talk about faith, that is a reality too. So what's the relationship?
In AA, there's very little talk about sin. There's talk about separation, and I think probably most theologians who would talk about sin say that that's really what it is. It's where the individual separates himself from God, from the community, and from himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that healing which has to take place in recovery. Alcoholics, I mean, the history of it goes back to Carl Jung. In the early 1930s, he had a patient that he was working with, and he worked with him for a year, sent him back to the States. The patient drank again, came back to Switzerland to work with Jung, and he pronounced him hopeless. That you are an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, and the only chance for recovery for you would be if you would undergo some kind of a spiritual experience, a conversion experience, a psychic change.
All right.
And so there you have the world's probably most famous psychiatrist kind of hooking in the process to what has to happen to the alcoholic to find recovery.
You want to add to that, Trish?
No, except that I think the faith community really can have a comprehensive approach to this issue. And for the person who's alcoholic and really sick, there's one response. For adolescents that are needing, monitoring and parental support, there's another kind of response. For abuse of alcohol and drugs, when it's truly intentional or volitional, then I think there's another kind of response where people are still in control of that. And in this society, it's hard. We have a hard time talking about all those things, the non-use, use, abuse, and then what is the addiction.
Yeah.
And there is a difference. But when a person is really sick is not the time to ask the question, what did I do wrong? It's a chance, it's a time to talk about what does it take to bring healing to my life.
When I was serving as a pastor and I worked with folks who had various kinds of addiction, one of the things that I found helpful was that they're already carrying a lot of guilt around.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to add to the guilt.
Right.
And that the genius of AA, it seems to me, is the fact that it's non-judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
We're all in the same boat together, and we're not going to call you a sinner. But at the same time, that when somebody is addicted, there are consequences of that addiction. Neglect of the family or destruction of relationships, and that the consequences of addiction are obviously fall into the category of selfishness or sin or whatever you want to call it. But that in order to rectify that or to change that, you almost have to begin with a non-judgmental affirmation that this person is a child of God, that no matter what he or she has done, there's hope. I mean, hope is a spiritual kind of thing. It's not just a psychological thing. And I'm almost preaching. Pardon me, I sometimes would just preach at the drop of a collection plate.
Well, and I think also the church is still kind of coming out of a prohibition mode in terms of, does everyone who drink become alcoholic? I mean, you can't just say when you drink you'll become alcoholic, or people who drink heavy become alcoholic. I mean, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that the person who becomes sick with alcoholism does have a genetic issue here.
Yes,
and
right.
and there are some different factors. There are chemical factors that are going on here. There are familial factors that are going on here, and that's different. And I do think we all have a chance to learn about ourselves when someplace someone accepts us and blesses us, lets us be that person we need to be so that we can then start our journey to heal and grow.
Okay, so let's go back to the conference. Let's repeat when it's going to be, where it's going to be, in case people weren't with us the first half. It's this October the 9th. It's a Saturday, 8:30 to 4:30. And besides being at the First Baptist Church, people can call you, I think. Isn't that your number, Trish?
Yes, yes. If they want more information about it, be glad to talk to them about it.
Okay, that 451-9504 will ring your office, and you can get back to them.
I want to say something, Rich. One of the reasons that congregations need to be involved is that in every congregation in this town, we have people in recovery.
Yeah.
And we have family members of folks who are alcoholic and drug dependent and need support and need help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of my goals for the workshop really is that we would have some clergy and congregations that would say, yes, let's get involved. Let's get our people trained. Let's do education in our church. Let's become a hospitable place for people in recovery. And that would be my hope.
Yeah. You know, there's certain churches in town that I've heard have got a special emphasis on that. One place that I've heard about is the Unitarian Church that has a number of folks who are in 12-step programs.
Right. St. Matthew's Episcopal has a really supportive atmosphere. Riverbend Baptist, of course, is I won't say what percentage of the of the congregation is in recovery, but it's very, very hospitable.
Sure.
To the recovering community.
Yeah, and as you say, Trish, every church would have people who are in recovery. You can almost assume that.
And every church has people who need to be in recovery.
Or need to be in recovery, right.
And the other side of that is there are people who are in recovery who I think are kind of kept away from church as part of the support system. In the early days of AA, nearly half of the people went back to church.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's that high today.
You think that's just because people, church attendance and membership and all has fallen off anyway, and they're just not having the experience of church, maybe?
I also think that there have developed some attitudes within some of the 12-step movements that have helped to separate people from church participation.
You're nodding your head. How come?
Well, I think if you haven't been back to the church that you grew up in for 20 or 25 years, I mean, think about it. I think congregations have gotten more educated in this area, and in many places are more friendly and more hospitable. And so I think if you have a view, and then if your only view was when you were in the middle of your disease and you were pretty sick, you may have heard things very differently than you might now, being sober and being on your own spiritual journey.
Yeah. Well, I have a hunch that people who come to your conference, you hope you get clergy there, lay leaders who are interested in helping a congregation become, as you put it, hospitable to recovery programs and process. And if it works out the way you hope, Trish, on the morning of October the 10th, after this thing is over, what will have happened? What would you like to see the outcome of this?
Well, that we'll be building this bridge, and we'll have another, what do you want to say, a bar across this bar. That's a slip, I guess. We'll have another plank in terms of the ease with which people move from treatment to the faith community, and ease with which people move from the faith community to treatment. Now, I've got to say one other thing. We have another person besides us who's presenting that day. And for those who may be watching, this could be appealing. We have Dr. Will Spong, who's from the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest, coming to do the keynote that morning in terms of pastoral care for folks who have been affected by alcoholism and drug dependency in their family or themselves.
And then you'll have workshops on various topics.
Right.
Like what?
Well, we're going to actually keep everybody together all day.
Oh, really?
And will talk about pastoral care. Bill will talk about treatment, the nature of treatment and addiction, and the spiritual recovery, what it takes. And I'm going to be talking about real practical things like how can we get something going in the church, and how do you recruit a team, and how do you find out if your church is ready for this kind of ministry.
Okay. And I know you have done church school classes, for instance, on applying the 12 steps to people and relating it to people who are not addicted, that the 12 steps have relevance for anybody. Doesn't that part of your approach in the church school classes that you led?
Certainly. I think that all people can benefit from being educated about the steps, just learning about what they are and what kind of a spiritual journey it is. But later on, if congregations choose to initiate a substance use ministry, they can decide what they want to offer, what would be best for their congregation. They should base it on the needs of their own congregation. They have a lot of folks in recovery who want to start a Scripture 12-step class, for instance, where they really talk about Scripture in relationship to the steps.
Yeah.
That's fine. But they may want to choose something else. They may want to do prevention activities. The pastors that come may want to do fifth steps. We're hoping that people after that day will see how they might relate differently to the community resources around alcoholism and drug dependency. And they'll hopefully know both of us as well and be able to call for help.
And as they get involved, as ministers and people from the church get involved in the recovery process, at ARC, for example, they would then kind of be inviting patients going through treatment to come to them to participate in their church when they leave treatment. And that becomes another support for these individuals.
I wonder, too, if there couldn't be some kind of an advocacy result from this. I remember when the RUDAT, as they call this study of the city several years ago, came in and looked at Austin's various needs, downtown particularly. They came up with the fact that there were so few beds that the city provided for people who needed to dry out.
Right.
I don't know if that's changed or not.
It's still the case. I mean, we usually have a 3-week to a 4-week waiting list for our men's program to get into treatment. These are individuals who are ready to come, and there's no room.
Wow. So, I mean, wouldn't that be something that could fire some folks up that this is ridiculous, a city this size? I think at the time they made this study, there were 6 or 8 beds that were available for this whole population, and there should probably be 600 beds.
And what that takes is education. We've got to educate our people within congregations so that team, for instance, can be an advocacy group for the needs of the community. I think you're right. Underneath a lot of this is a real justice question. You know, are people who are sick getting the help that they need? How much is alcoholism and drug dependency impacting our lives? And how could we, do something different about that?
Yeah. I saw a little piece that you had about the number of people who are, addicted and the cost to society. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, but you could vouch, probably at this conference, you could give chapter and verse on that.
It costs our country billions and billions of dollars. Addictions of all stripes do. Some studies have said that 70% of the people in a general hospital at any one time are in there as the result of some form of addiction, be it cigarettes, food, alcohol, drugs.
Would you please continue that at the conference?
We certainly will.
I want to thank you in the meantime, Bill Wigmore, for being here.
Thank
Trish
you.
Merrill for
Well,
coming.
thank you for having us.
And I hope you folks have benefited from this, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, giving you peace.